Hello, my name's Andy. Welcome to the fifth and final retro episode of Keeping Water. In this episode I'll be taking a look at the pond you can see from the outside, how it grew and evolved and some of the key features. As you'll know if you've watched my other videos, this iteration of the pond lasted about 2.5 years, but it had many good aspects and I learnt a lot from it. Although I don't want to linger too long on mistakes I made, it is necessary to point out one key error. As I've mentioned a couple of times before, the pond wasn't level. As you can see, the amount of visible liner is much greater on the left than it is over on the right. This will have a significant effect on how the planting and edging develops over time. I always planned for the pond to have a lot of marginal plants, however it took time to build up a complete set. It was as they increased in number that the problem with marginal depth became more apparent. The water to the left was too shallow to plant, so to hide the liner I began using rocks to cover it. I'm not a big fan of too many rocks, but they look better than the liner. The artificial grass didn't work, too much like a carpet, and did the opposite of what it was intended to do, make a natural looking surround. The cheap replacement option was wood chip with some logs around the edge. Still not too natural, but again, better than what was there. I next placed pebbles around the next shelf. This was partly to hide the liner and also to add to the natural look. This didn't really work particularly well and they became a magnet for algae and were very hard to clean. Although the plants were growing well, they didn't all look like plants for ponds, instead looking like plants that grow on land near ponds. I added some plants in between the rocks which worked better. They also died back a lot over winter and, with the additional fallen leaves, the pond looked a little sorry for itself. Into spring and I began the job of replacing the less suitable plants and building up the lilies. I took the plants from out of the rocks as they didn't winter well. With the plants becoming more established, the natural look I had wanted was looking more achievable. The rocks were still not great and stood out somewhat, but, as I've said, they looked a lot better than plain liner. I did have a plan for addressing this side, but that would be for later in the year. Before we look at that though, I'll just mention this photo of the pond, as it demonstrates really well the problem with the second shelf. Even with the pebbles removed, it took up a large part of the pond and reduced the amount of deeper water for the increasingly larger carp to swim and shelter in. It was also too uniform to be natural looking. When I rebuilt the pond, I removed this whole shelf as well as the marginal shelf along the far side. To improve its natural look, I needed to increase the height of some parts of the pond to make it more level. I lifted the liner around the pond and filled with soil. This didn't fix the problem completely, but did enable me to plant all around the pond's marginal shelf. This considerably improved the look of the pond, and with more of the more appropriate type of plants, brought the pond's look much closer to the natural look I had been after. The waterfall didn't really look too natural, but added an aesthetic to the pond that I liked, and, as you'll see later, was enjoyed by some of the other wildlife that visited. The lilies always looked great, even when dying off, and gave the pond an even more natural look, as well as shade and shelter for the fish. Their baskets were a problem, both in terms of look and safety for the fish. The stems, however, added a really natural look, especially as the fish swam amongst them. They took a bit of battering from the carp especially, and due to that and my lack of knowledge about how best to care for them, meant they never really got the chance to become established. There's not much I'd like to repeat from this first iteration of the pond, but I would really love to give lilies another go. Some large robust lilies would really add to the look of the pond, both above and below the surface. Although not a wildlife pond, a lot of other creatures visited and lived in the pond, as well as the surrounding garden. The frogs and birds avoid the garden a little more these days due to the younger cats we have now, but dragonflies and bees are regular summer visitors. Thank you so much for watching this final episode of the Retro series. I have plans for other series for topics that don't fit into the regular weekly episode format. I'm not sure when I'll start working on these, but as the winter tends to be quiet time for ponds, it may well be over the next couple of months. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.